Hello everyone, I'm Brian. Today we're reacting to Vivekananda in America, Professor Ruth Harris. So, I'm not exactly sure what this will be about, but let's go ahead and give it a shot. Guru to the World.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome. We are very happy to give a warm welcome today to Professor Ruth Harris, who will speak to us about her recently published book, Guru to the World. This is the beautiful book. It's a book which is being called the definitive biography of Swami Vivekananda. Professor Harris has been Professor of Modern European History at the University of Oxford since 2011 and Senior Research Fellow at All Souls College, Oxford since 2016. Previously, she was a Junior Research Fellow at St. John's College, Oxford from 1983 to 1987, an Associate Professor at Smith College, Massachusetts from 1987 to 1990, and a Fellow of New College, Oxford between 1990 and 2016. Her research interests are global history of religion.
Real quick, I guess you have to state all her acolytes. Hold on, let me pull out the rap sheet of Brian here. It's like Brian is a YouTuber. Okay, that's the end of that. All right, on to the next video.
19th and 20th centuries, now focused on South Asia, Europe, and America. French history, 19th and 20th centuries. History of gender, 19th and 20th centuries. History of medicine and science, 19th and 20th centuries. She is the author of several books, including Lords, Body and Spirit in the Secular Age, Murders and Madness, Medicine, Law and Society in the Fin de Siècle, The Man on Devil's Island, a biography on Alfred Dreyfus, for which she was awarded the Wolfson History Prize in 2010. And just this month, Guru to the World has been published by Harvard University Press. It traces Vivekananda's transformation from the son of a Calcutta-based attorney into a saffron-robed ascetic and shows how at his appearance in the 1893 World Parliament of Religions in Chicago, he fascinated audiences with teachings from Hinduism, Western esoteric, spirituality, physics, and the sciences of the mind, and in the process advocating a more inclusive conception of religion and expounding the evils of colonialism. Her book is for sale on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple Books, and more. The book has received outstanding reviews, and I'd like to invite Professor Harris to please tell us more.
Good morning.
Maybe I could have skipped all that.
Morning, everyone. I'm so glad to be here. Despite my bio, I'm American, and it's wonderful to come here and be with an American audience. It's doubly wonderful because I don't get to speak to people who actually know something about Vivekananda. When I'm in Britain or even in America, I have to explain that he's a household name in India, perhaps now is widely known and perhaps even more admired for many than Gandhi. And those who have heard of him know him from what Indians see as his triumphant intervention in the Chicago Parliament of Religions in 1893. So for them, India is a backstory to the American story, and that's not actually the way we should look at it, I don't think. During this gathering, designed to showcase the superiority of Protestant modernism, he addressed his Western audience as sisters and brothers rather than as masters. And this is a story, and that, of course, these are all pictures that you know so well. What I love about the pictures, of course, he's always in the middle. And here he's in the middle next to Dharmapala and another Jaina delegate. But what's so interesting is that The legend has truth in it, often, unlike many historical legends. It's true he condemned Christian missionaries and implied that Hinduism was superior to Christianity because, quote, we believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true. It's a tale that is, as I said, almost mythical, as is the story of his subsequent progress and success in the West. But the question that fascinated me when I first learned about Vivekananda, and let me tell you, I was another one of the Westerners who had never heard of him, was why did anyone listen to him? Why was the applause so thunderous? Certainly, he was perceived as exotic and was bathed in Orientalist imaginings from the very beginning, hence the invented costume of the scarlet robe and orange turban. The turban came from the Raj of Khetri. Cliches he both exploited but also remade. For those Americans who sought something new, he offered a vision of Vedanta that was both ancient and avant-garde, a universalism that was intensely idealist and yet in line with practical Vedanta that engaged in human affairs. And of course, in contrast to the missionary stereotype of the idol-worshipping heathen, Vivekananda prioritized the most intellectually prestigious tradition within Hindu religion, Advaita Vedanta. He emphasized the underlying unity of all being, denied the importance of images and symbolism, though he did not mock them or throw them away. He constantly mentioned that Ramakrishna had realized everything through his love for Kalima, and conveyed a sense of the human-divine connection through such terms as the realization of the self and consciousness of God, terms that we use all the time and which in many ways we owe to him.
Real quick, have you read any of the books? What would you suggest is the definitive book for Swami Vivekananda? I am genuinely thinking about getting the book. I don't know if her book, well, they claim that her book is the definitive one. Kind of weird. I mean, I don't know if there's anyone that followed him and documented his, his life. Just let me know if you care to.
Of course, these were also terms that his Western audience could understand. As you know, he regarded the essence of the human self, or Atman, as ultimately indistinguishable from Brahman, the Absolute. He thus challenged the Christian view of a God as distinct from humanity and his creation. And so all these ideas, these were not simple ideas, these were all hard ideas, very difficult. So why was it that they listened to him? He appealed especially to women, and especially women raised as Christians but who had undergone crises of faith, but they were highly intellectual women. Their loyalty to him and to his teaching are important because his version of Hindu universalism can only be understood by acknowledging the centrality of what historians have often called the feminization of religion in the 19th century. Now, this term is applied to Catholicism and Protestantism, for this feminization was crucial to the missionary realm under imperialism. But in the case of Hindu universalism, the ideas and spiritual practices flowed in the other direction, with forms of meditation, yoga, healing, and visions of selfhood becoming important to the American and European spiritual landscape. And it's all the more extraordinary, given that we know this is part of our own culture, and I'm talking as somebody who was raised in New York and Philadelphia, that Vivekananda's name is not well known in the wider world. Rather than becoming handmaidens of imperialism, like so many other of the missionaries and missionary wives who were Christian, these women were often fiercely anti-imperialists, and the one most famously so was Margaret Noble, Sister Nivedita, and like Vivekananda, argued for the spiritualization of a materialistic society by what they called Eastern wisdom. Now, that's a term that is used constantly. It's very essentializing. What is Eastern wisdom? It's many things, but of course, it was something that really attracted them. Now, today, because the topic is vast, I want to answer the question of Vivekananda's appeal by focusing on his creation of the guru-disciple relationship in non-Hindu societies. I want to understand how he spoke of Indian religion in ways that they could appreciate. I want to show how teaching and example were part of a transnational global preoccupation with the religious and scientific understanding of what was variously known as rapport, what connected people. So that could be suggestion, therapeutic connection, transference love if you were Freud. It all depended on the commentator. Now, he was very interested in what everyone was doing, but he wanted to do it through Vedanta, which he thought was the best way. Okay? The focus on how people related, on healers and subjects, analysts and analysand, and finally guru-disciple, is central to what I will argue here, and about the uniqueness of Vivekananda's personality and the bonds that he could forge with people. He was unique and thoroughly Indian, and yet partook of the ambient currents surrounding the nature of self and consciousness that linked him to such spiritual pioneers as Mary Baker Eddy, who invented Christian Science. Remember that all of his followers, the women, even Margaret Noble, who was British, but it was much more important in America, had experimented with Christian Science. And Vivekananda, because of his openness, had also experimented with Christian Science. He used it for his insomnia, and it said occasionally it worked. He wasn't very impressed with American techniques, but he was open to try. And of course, it goes right to the heart of the greatest aspect of American intellectual life at this time, people such as William James, with whom he had discussions. And as you'll see in my book, there's more than a discussion. There is citations, correspondence. I really think that there is a sub rosa conversation of great importance going on between William James and Vivekananda. And so I'm just tell you that if you do have a chance to look at the book. And also with people even with Jean-Martin Charcot and perhaps surprisingly even Sigmund Freud. They're all working in a similar field, but Vivekananda is doing it from a very different perspective, and yet he's approaching people in ways that they can begin to understand. So I want to show how Vivekananda was important to Western conversations about mind and consciousness, and once again, how he remains elusive and often erased, and I wanted to put him back into the story. Before he could make a sustained impact, he first needed to learn how to communicate. And of course, as you know, his command of English was impeccable, but he knew little of what made Americans tick. Now, he honed his craft, above all, at Greenacre in Maine, and that's where he is. Some of you have seen this photo. I love this photo because, again, he's stuck in the middle with his turban. But I think it gives a fantastic view of his difference, you know, and no attempt to hide that difference between him and the people that he loved and admired, the Yankees, but who he did say were dry and stony.
Very Indian. What? What does that even mean? Whenever it says very Indian, I'm like, well, yeah, he's Indian, obviously, but what do you mean by very Indian? And then the fact that he stood out because of his clothing, well, I mean, I guess. Then again, I don't know. This is back in the 1890s. I mean, I didn't think everyone dressed the same. I mean, sure, foreigners are quite rare. I'm sure if you go to the West Coast, there are very much more Asians there, because that's where the Asian slaves were at. And so and also a lot of the Asian trades, not mercenaries, merchants. That's what I meant to say, like Asian merchants and whatnot, and where a lot of Asian businesses were started. Because again, it's a lot closer to Asia, obviously, rather than New York. I wonder how he got to New York. Did he go to England first and then swung over to New York? Did he come from California to go to New York? Interesting why he wanted to go to New York, or is it Chicago? Anyways, the East Coast area instead of the West Coast of America. But it's really weird. She's like, oh yeah, he did clearly. I kept looking at that picture of him and trying to see his clothing. I was hoping that she would show a colored picture, but she described yellow turban and a red. I think that's the right word for it. So I just look up there just to see his Good Lord, if I can point correct. There we go. The picture of him. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure they would find it strange, but, I think it looks fine. But then again, different times, so maybe back in those days, he's like, oh man, what a strange fellow for wearing cloth on his head and no suit, I think. Yeah. He's not wearing a tuxedo. That's weird.
And metaphysically brittle, So it's into this world that he brings yoga. He honed his craft above all at Greenacre in Maine, a summer encampment for spiritual experimentalists and spiritual seekers of all stripes. There he paid close attention to their pastimes and thoughts and offered his first lessons in yoga under the Swami's pine. Above all, he saw how emotion, ideas, and practices met and absorbed an understanding of their spiritual concerns and doubts. And he was very sweet. He would write back to Mary Hale in Chicago and say, "Dear sister, come to Greenacre and see all the," he didn't use the word, but he did say, they'll be healing the blind in 2 minutes. They'll be doing this, they'll be doing that. He was teasing without being harsh. And it's a very interesting way because, in fact, he was trying to convince them that their levels of metaphysical speculation were actually quite narrowly. And he had seen things in India, and he'd known Ramakrishna, so he felt that he had the right to he didn't judge, but he expressed himself. Now I want to ask you what kind of people they were. The Greenacreites were interested in racial uplift. They had, Booker T. Washington came. People like this came. Feminism, there were a lot of feminists there. Religious universalism. Comparative religion was very important from the Brooklyn Ethical Society and Janes, and often anti-imperialism, not always, but often. And this was a rarity in this Western context, though not as rare in America as it would have been in Britain because of the revolutionary tradition. They saw themselves in an anti-colonial mode, especially these Yankees. And remember, the Parliament was 5 years before the Spanish-American War when the United States joined the imperial competition. So it's an interesting moment when he's there. Above all, evolutionary theory had destabilized the biblical convictions of his American interlocutors, and they talk again and again about this, while they rejected the sin and hellfire of their often Calvinist parents. And I can't emphasize enough how relieved they felt when Vivekananda would say, "You are not sinners." We know this from the Parliament from the very beginning. It is a sin to call you sinners. And again, they feel that release from original sin. And later retrospective accounts describe how a hush went through the Parliament when he said the things in original sin. Because still, that was considered something that was immovable. And I think they were also
in some cases.
Enthralled by the new sciences of mind emerging in psychology. Of course, Sarah Bull was a society hostess and an intellectual. She was friends with William James. She wanted him to preface Raja Yoga, and he didn't. He was dilatory. And he also, in the end, didn't agree with Vivekananda, as Vivekananda didn't agree with him. They were interested in anthropology and so regarded Vivekananda's insights on perception, experience, and states of meditation as a spiritual and intellectual boon. Vivekananda admired their search, but pitied them for their lack of bhakti. And that is really interesting, their lack of devotion, their lack of
love,
sweetness. And for metaphysics, which I said he called stony and dry. Bhakti, as you know, is central to the guru-disciple relationship. Greenacre also solidified his realization of American women's spiritual and practical power. From his first sojourn in Massachusetts before the Parliament, he had connected with women who became his mentors and mothers, friends, and sisters. And in 1893 he wrote, "Your men I do not like, they are all for money." It's an extraordinary statement. But your women, Lord bless them. From then on, their role was vital, and in 1894 he remarked, "I am a woman amongst women," and that he continued, "closely associated with them in all their affairs." Now, these words are never quoted.
Well, I would say because it's a different time. Men were always the workers, and women at the time were the households. And even whenever the men, even whenever they were rich, at least in some cases, because the people in that picture, they were dressed fancy, like tuxedos. That's high class, and even then, women didn't really necessarily work in the house. I think they always had servants or whatever they're called back then to clean the house. So the women, I think for the most part, didn't have too much to do, but men were also generally speaking, hustling out, making money. And then if you look at the lower class people, I think it's straight up 50-50 work, where women were, again, they didn't really work, but they work in the house. They're the ones that are cleaning, the more of the poor ones. And they didn't really have enough time because there's a lot to do around the house and taking care of the kids. And the man was out working, bringing home the bacon, as they say. But in the rich society, where it seems like he's at, women in the rich families, of course, just took care of the kids and maybe cleaned up a little bit. Generally speaking, they probably had house servants. I'm wondering if she will notate the difference in societies, because I think the North was quite rich compared to the South. There's rich people in the South and there's rich people in the North, but the North was most industrious, and the South was more like cotton and farming for the most part. So I'm wondering if she wrote in the book the distinction, if Vivekananda visited the North and the South and the West to see the differences and see how people played differently there.
About Vivekananda. This is seen to be for Ramakrishna. He sounds like Ramakrishna. But what I'm saying is, let's look at what Vivekananda said. He said, as you know, Ramakrishna was famous for speaking of the sexless Atman. And here, this is not the man...
Hold on. What?
Speaking of the sexless Atman.
Okay, I want to make sure I heard that right. Sexless Atman.
And here, this is not the man-making hero of Hindu ultranationalism. He famously proclaimed that he did not know, we know for Ramakrishna that he didn't know if he was a man or woman, often dressing as a woman, although very different from his guru in sensibility, appearance, and spiritual inclination. Vivekananda proclaimed that he wanted to be reincarnated as an American woman, and he said this in India. And I think that's part of the playfulness. This is part of his divine play, if you don't mind my using, I'm not a devotee, but I think it's very important that you realize those aspects that were retained in Vivekananda and what he used very much and deployed in making fun of these materialistic, stony, dry men and the women who he wanted to help to become more robust and less brittle. And yet this emphasis on the feminine was vital to the global amalgam he and his female acolytes made together, and his belief, which they shared, that women were intuitively spiritual. Remember how important he is in his relationship to Sharada Devi, and the Holy Mother. It also recast their vision of the saint-confessor relationship, so ubiquitous within Christianity, but which they felt they could readily grasp, albeit on very different terms. Moreover, their conversation provided him with the clues he needed to connect. And now we go on to the next slide. Now there she is, Sarah Farmer, Unitarian from the Transcendentalist tradition, the organizer of Greenacre, and she impressed him with her spiritual aura. And she said, "Never despise any rung of the ladder by which another is rising," a remark that resonated with him with the Gita's famous injunction, "Whosoever comes to me, through whatsoever form, I reach him." Both remarks were very different from the Gospel of John, where Christ is deemed to say, "No one comes to the Father except through me." Now, repeatedly, he examined the many different healing therapies on offer. There was mesmerism, hypnotherapy, mind control, Christian science, and theosophy. And all these alternative philosophies were present at Greenacre. He spent a tremendous amount of time separating Vedanta from these seemingly overlapping teachings. He was very careful to constantly explain the differences. And when he sometimes mocked them in private, he often used their vocabulary to convey his meaning. Following Ramakrishna's dictum that a true guru must endeavor to teach people in a language they can understand. Now,
hold on.
Convey his meaning. Private, he
Differences, and once he sometimes mocked them in private. Did he really mock the religion in private?
often used their vocabulary to convey his meaning. Following Ramakrishna's dictum that a true guru must endeavor to teach people in a language they can understand.
Don't disagree
Now,
with
what
that.
I find so interesting about this is that when you do go to the specialist historiography, people say, oh, well, he came to America and he globalized and he lost authentic Hinduism. As if there was something like that. But I would say that actually he was carrying out what Ramakrishna had done with him. He was already himself a Brahmo, which in the Indian context, many people wouldn't have found very Hindu. It was already a big change, and he comes back with Ramakrishna and then reinterprets the tradition together. At Greenacre, he also met Sarah Bull, the woman who provided the funds for the construction of the Ramakrishna Math and Mission in Belur. She was a wealthy cosmopolitan, equally at home in New England. Amongst she was related to the Longfellows and as in the bohemian world of artistic Europe, through her violinist husband, Ola Bull, in Norway. And of course, I went this summer to Norway and saw the beautiful house on Lysoen. So what we're and it's already Orientalist. It's very interesting. She has an interest, she and Bull had an interest in Orientalism even before they met Vivekananda. She met Vivekananda. But what I wanted to do with her is show the trajectory. She had turned to the Harvard Professor Irving Babbitt's translation of the Dhammapada and Arnold's The Light of Asia. Now, The Light of Asia was one of the greatest bestsellers of the 19th century. After the Bible, it was really up there. So what we're having is, it's not as if these people aren't getting something of Eastern wisdom. They're getting quite a lot. They sit in their drawing rooms and they're reading the sacred books of the East as they come off Max Muller's, translations. But they also have their own traditions, and those are spiritualism and Emanuel Swedenborg. Of course, Sarah Bull kept on trying to reach her husband after he died. There's a whole generation of women who are trying to connect with their sons that had died during the Civil War. It was such a shock. They actually revised their view of a Christian heaven as being something much more gentle, because they can't bear the thought of their sons having had no life and having been struck down.
So young.
But Swedenborg is particularly important, and it's very interesting. If you read the press at the time, they see Vivekananda as somebody who predated Swedenborg. And I find this extraordinary. The Lutheran mystic had created an inclusive fraternity that bound together, quote, the life of everyone, whether man, spirit, or angel, unquote, in what he called the divine influx. Swedenborg also spoke of the breath as the central medium for, quote, communication between the body and the spirit, an idea that certainly prepared Bull, for example, for Vivekananda's teaching on the pranayama, or the practice of breath or energy control. Like all of Vivekananda's acolytes, she experimented with Mary Baker Eddy's Christian Science. She had done mind control. America's burgeoning new creed, which saw humanity's suffering as nothing more than, quote, waking dream shadows. Now, I think this is a very, very interesting description, because it's strikingly similar to the Maya Vedanta. And This cardinal Hindu concept, as you all know, denotes an illusion that conceals the true character of spiritual reality and suggests that the temporal world is called into being through nothing more than what is called divine play. Eddy called on Christian Science operators to help patients marshal their real selves so as to enter the kingdom of God immediately and thereby to lose the illusion of different egos in different bodies. And what's so amazing is that Vivekananda sees them as sort of Vedantins. He actually says they're Vedantins, but not very sophisticated Vedantins, but he gets it, that these are people who may begin to understand.
Interesting, whenever he said Maya Vedanta. I'm like, I assume she meant to say the saying, the idea of Maya in Vedanta, the illusion of the world. But I mean, it's pretty interesting hearing how she interprets things, and plus it's kind of funny how she says Vedanta. But then again, I probably say it that way too. I just probably don't hear it.
Again, this was a concept that Vivekananda used because of his emphasis on underlying unity and the illusion of material separation. The fact that they had already had some idea of it was important. Thus, Vivekananda could tap into preoccupations that focused on the absolute mind and the infinite unity of consciousness, things that they got from the Oversoul of Thoreau, and which included even theosophy. But of course, he spent a lot of time trying to shift them away from theosophy because he hated the cherry picking of Indian religion. And we would call it appropriation, the worst kind of appropriation. Vivekananda, I see differently. He appropriated everything, but he tried to respect its essence, but theosophy didn't. Okay, in almost every case, these spiritual movements included techniques for healing and what was called self-realization, especially in Christian Science, that depended on enabling operators and spiritual guides to enhance beneficent states of consciousness. And here's another one. This one I want to show you. Here's Mary Baker Eddy and faith healing. It's a very Christian vision. He's in bed. It's very interesting. She did have a lot of success. She worked with many different kinds of people. But of course, this is, again, a very idealized vision. But the connection, Vivekananda pushed for meditation because he didn't like the idea of operators imposing their spirituality on others. He was afraid of coercion. But it's a very interesting thing to see.
Yeah, I guess when you look at that, I'm wondering if they push you have to believe for this to work. You have to believe God's the Savior, and you have to believe in Christianity, and you have to convert to Christianity for me to heal you. So in a sense, you're being coerced into believing in that just so you can be healed because you're suffering.
I want now to move to the real nub of the issue. If Bull had done all these things,
you know what? Actually, we will pause it right there. This is going to be probably about a 3-parter, just in case I talk too much. It's about an hour and 30 minutes. If you want to watch it uncut, please go to the description. If it's not there because I updated, please search for my title without the react and look for that image. But anyways, interesting. Let me know as we watch these in the comments below. Tell me what you think about what she's saying about it, Swami Vivekananda. I don't know anything about him, but I like his teachings a lot. Like a lot. Because it seems very practical. And it's something that, as I'm reacting to Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta and all the different kind of philosophies in Hinduism, I'm kind of creating my own not philosophy, but my own way, the things that I pick and choose that I like. But it's very much a lot like his. So I'm wondering if the things that I like are very much what he's saying. So I don't know what he practices a lot so far. I know a few things. They're very practical, and that's the thing that I like. And that's why I kind of want to know more about his teaching specifically, but I don't know how much of it's out there. But But anyways, let me know. What do you think about, as I do this video, it's going to be about a 3-parter. Your thoughts so far on what she said about Swami Vivekananda. And also let me know, is there a book that you think is the definitive book of Swami Vivekananda in terms of his life or video, and his teachings as well. Alright, this is the first part of Vivekananda in America, Professor Ruth Harris. If you like my content, please consider subscribing, thumbs up, thumbs down below. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next vid.